Ji-won had always wanted to see the real sky. For her whole life, she had lived under the metal domes of the underground colony on Kepler 442b, watching the world through thick glass panels. The red sun of this alien planet fascinated her. She read every book about space, about stars, about the worlds beyond the protective tunnels where her people lived. But reading was not the same as seeing. Reading was not the same as feeling. On the day that would change everything, Ji-won was 11 years old. She had long, dark hair that her mother, Min-seo, always told her to tie back properly. She had bright eyes that looked at the world with curiosity and wonder. She was small for her age, still growing into her body, still discovering what it meant to be human on a world that was not Earth. That morning, while her mother was working at the colony's main communication center, Ji-won made a decision. She would sneak out. She would go to the surface. She would touch the red soil of Kepler 442b with her own hands and feel the heat of its sun on her face. It was not a safe choice. The colony had strict rules. No one left the domes without permission. No one went to the surface alone. But Ji-won was 11. And 11-year-old children often make choices that adults would never make. She packed a small bag with water and some food. She wore her colony suit, the thin, protective clothing that all humans wore when they left the domes. And she brought Teao with her. Teao was a honey badger. He had arrived on Kepler 442b 3 years ago, brought from Earth by Ji-won's father before he went away on a mining expedition and never came back. The honey badger was small, only about 60 centimeters long, with thick fur that was black on top and white or light yellow underneath. His paws were strong and his claws were sharp. He had small, dark eyes that missed nothing. To most people, he looked like nothing important. To Ji-won, he was family. The badger had his own small carrier that Ji-won had made special, with soft cloth inside and air holes so he could breathe. She put him in the carrier and attached it carefully to her back. Teao made a small sound, a gentle chirp that meant he was ready for adventure. The badger loved adventures. In his old life on Earth, before he came to space, he had been the kind of animal that went everywhere, that fought everything, that refused to give up no matter how dangerous the situation was. Even though he was now in a human settlement far from Earth, he still had that wild spirit inside him. Ji-won made her way to the maintenance exit of the colony. It was a tunnel that the workers used to check the outside equipment and repair the dome seals. She had been there once before with her father, when she was younger, when he still lived in the colony. She remembered the way. The tunnel twisted and turned, went up and down through the earth, finally opening to a small hatch on the surface. It was hard work to open the hatch. It was heavy and covered in dust and dirt, but Ji-won pushed and pushed until finally it opened with a loud click. Fresh air came down into the tunnel, and it smelled strange. It did not smell like the recycled air of the colony. It smelled like rocks and wind and something wild and untamed. She climbed out into the sunlight. The surface of Kepler 442b was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Red rocks stretched across the ground in all directions. The sky was not blue like Earth's sky, but more orange and brown, with clouds that moved fast and strange. The sun was smaller than Earth's sun and redder, giving everything a color like blood and fire. The wind was cold and strong, much stronger than anything Ji-won had ever felt inside the domes. She walked away from the colony, down into a deep ravine between two hills of red stone. She wanted to be far enough that no one would see her from the colony towers. She wanted to be alone with Teao and the strange beauty of this world. She took the badger out of his carrier and let him walk on the rocks beside her. He moved like he owned the planet. His short legs pumping fast, his nose up in the air, smelling everything. For 2 hours, Ji-won and Teao explored. They saw rocks that glowed faintly in the strange light. They found pools of clear water between the stones. They watched clouds move across the orange sky. It was the most wonderful time that Jiwon had ever experienced. Her heart felt full and happy. This was what she had always wanted. This was real. This was true. But then the sky changed. First, Jiwon saw the shadow. It came from above, from the clouds, and it was huge. It was so big that it blocked out the orange sunlight. Then she heard the sound. It was a deep, angry sound, like thunder mixed with the cry of some giant mechanical beast. The sound made the rocks under her feet shake and vibrate. Jiwon looked up. A ship was coming down through the clouds. It was not like anything she had ever seen, even in pictures or videos. It was shaped like an insect, all sharp angles and hard metal. It was dark gray and black, covered in weapons and strange devices that glowed with cold light. It was enormous, perhaps as long as 10 buildings put together. As she watched, it began to land on the red soil, spraying dust and rocks in all directions. Jiwon's heart stopped beating for a moment. Then it began to beat very fast. Teao made a sound. It was not a normal badger sound. It was a warning sound. She knew what was happening. Everyone in the colony had been taught about the Krillians, the alien species that traveled through space hunting other species. The hunters that had destroyed many human colonies in other systems, the beings that saw humans as prey. Jiwon grabbed Teao and ran. She ran deeper into the ravine between tall rocks, trying to find somewhere to hide. Behind her, she could hear the ship's landing legs touching the ground with sounds like thunder. She could see lights beginning to shine down the ravine, red and bright, like laser beams searching for something. She found a large boulder, flat and wide, with a space underneath where a small person could hide. She crawled under it, pulling Teao close to her body. The badger did not resist. He seemed to understand that they needed to be quiet now. He seemed to understand that the danger was real. The red lights moved across the rocks above them, getting closer and closer. Jiwon could hear the sound of heavy things moving. She could hear voices that were not human voices, making sounds that were not human sounds. Clicking and hissing, and sounds like metal grinding against metal. She held Teao as close as she could. She put her hand over his small mouth, not to hurt him, but just to make sure he did not make a sound. The badger looked up at her with his small dark eyes, and she saw something in those eyes that she had never seen before. She saw that he was not afraid. She saw that he understood something she did not. She saw that he was ready. The red lights came closer. Jiwon could see shadows moving across the rocks above her hiding place. The sounds were getting louder. Heavy footsteps, strange voices making clicking sounds, equipment beeping and buzzing. Her breath came fast and hard, and she had to work very hard to keep herself from making any noise at all. Then she saw them. 4 creatures descended into the ravine on devices that floated in the air. These were the Krillians. They were nothing like humans. They were tall and thin, with bodies covered in hard, shiny armor that looked like the shells of giant insects. Their heads were long and shaped differently from human heads. They had large eyes that glowed with a pale blue light. Their arms were long and thin and ended in sharp claws that clicked against the rocks as they moved. Each one was holding a weapon that glowed with deadly light. Jiwon's entire body went cold with fear. She had seen pictures of Krillians before, in colony school, but pictures were not the same as seeing them in person. Pictures did not show how scary they really looked. Pictures did not show the way they moved, smooth and fast like predators. Pictures did not show the feeling you got when you saw them, the feeling that these were beings that had hunted and killed many times before. The creatures made more clicking sounds. They were speaking to each other, but not in any human language. Their sounds seemed to come from their bodies, like clicks and hisses that bounced off the rocks. One of them held up a device that glowed, and the red light swept across the ravine, searching, hunting, looking for anything that moved. Teao made a very small sound. It was just a tiny noise, barely anything at all, but to Ji-won it sounded as loud as thunder. She pressed her hand down on the badger's mouth again, whispering without sound, trying to tell him to be quiet, to please be quiet, because if they found them, everything would be over. The red light moved closer to their hiding place. Ji-won closed her eyes. She could feel her heart beating so fast she thought it would burst out of her chest. She could feel her hands shaking. This was it. This was the end. The Krillians would find them, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. But the light moved past them. It swept across the rocks above the boulder and continued on down the ravine. The creatures moved forward, their hunting sounds continuing, their weapons ready, but they had not found her and Teao yet. Ji-won waited. She counted in her head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. She counted to 100, then to 200. The sounds of the Krillians became quieter and quieter. They were moving away from her hiding place, moving deeper into the ravine, searching in different places. Very slowly, very carefully. Ji-won lifted her head just enough to look out from under the boulder. She could see the creatures in the distance now, and they were looking at something. One of them held a device that glowed, and the device was making beeping sounds. One of the creatures made a clicking sound that seemed different from the others. The others made responses, more clicking, more hissing. Then something bad happened. One of the creatures turned. It looked directly at the space where Ji-won was hiding. It did not see her, but it began to walk in her direction anyway. The creature was walking slowly, carefully, like a hunter who had found the scent of its prey but had not yet found the body. Ji-won pulled back down under the boulder. She held Teao against her chest. She closed her eyes again. She prayed, even though she was not very religious, that the creature would just walk past them. She prayed that it would not look under the boulder. She prayed that she and Teao would live to see another day. The footsteps came closer. Click, click, click. The sound of hard feet on hard rock. Click, click, click. The sound of heavy armor moving. The creature was right above her now. She could hear it breathing. She could hear the sounds of its equipment. She could hear the weapon in its hand making soft humming sounds as it was ready to fire. Then the creature leaned down and looked under the boulder. For a moment, the blue eyes of the creature and the dark eyes of Ji-won met. Neither of them moved. Neither of them made a sound. The universe seemed to stop. Time seemed to stop. There was just the girl and the alien creature and the moment between them. Then the creature began to reach under the boulder with one of its sharp-clawed hands. In that second, something inside Teao changed. The badger had been quiet and still, hidden against Ji-won's body, waiting and hoping like she was. But when the claw reached toward them, when the danger became real and immediate and touching, the honey badger became something different. Teao was a small animal. He weighed less than 5 kilograms. He had no weapons. He had no armor. He had no technology. What he had was something much older and much more powerful. He had the instinct to survive. He had the courage of an ancient hunter. He had the fierce determination of an animal that had never, in his entire life, backed down from anything. The badger moved so fast that Ji-won did not even see him jump. One moment he was in her arms. The next moment he was flying through the air, his body stretched out, his claws extended, his mouth open wide with a sound that was part scream and part growl and part something that no human had ever heard before. He hit the Krillian's face at full speed. The creature screamed. It was a sound of pain and surprise and confusion. It was a sound that said this was not supposed to happen. The creature had hunted and killed many times. It had never been attacked by something so small. It had never experienced this kind of courage. Teo's claws found the seams in the creature's armor, the places where the hard protective shell had gaps. The badger's teeth found exposed skin. The creature flailed and thrashed, trying to shake off the small animal that was now attached to its face, fighting for its life in the way that only a honey badger knows how to fight. The other three Krillians turned. They made sounds of alarm. They began to move in the direction of their companion. But everything had changed in that single moment. The hunt was no longer simple. The prey was no longer helpless. And on Kepler 442b, in a red ravine under an orange sky, one small animal was showing a species of great hunters what it really meant to never give up. The Krillian that had Teao attached to its face made sounds that were not sounds of a great hunter. They were sounds of panic. The creature spun around in circles, trying to shake off the small badger, but Teao held on. The badger was small, but his claws were sharp and his grip was strong. His entire body was focused on one thing and one thing only: survival. He would not let go. He would not stop fighting. Jiwan watched from under the boulder. She could not believe what was happening. She could not believe that Teao was actually fighting the alien creature. She could not believe that the badger was not instantly killed. But as she watched, she understood something important. She understood that being brave did not mean not being afraid. It meant fighting anyway. It meant doing what was right even when you knew it was dangerous. The second Krillian ran toward its companion to help him. As it ran, it made clicking sounds, probably trying to call the other creatures to come help as well. But when it got close to the first creature, Teao made a choice that showed just how intelligent he really was. The badger let go of the first creature's face and jumped directly at the second one. The second creature was not ready for this. It expected the badger to stay with the first creature. It did not expect to be attacked itself. Teao hit it with the force of his entire body, small as that body was, and his claws found the joints of its armor. The badger's teeth found the exposed parts of its neck. Now both of the first two creatures were screaming and thrashing around. They were hitting at the badger, trying to throw him off, but their armor made it hard for them to move quickly and carefully. They kept hitting each other instead of hitting Teao. They kept getting in each other's way. Jiwan crawled out from under the boulder. Her fear was still there, but it was different now. It was not the fear of a helpless prey. It was the fear of someone who knew she had to act, had to move, had to do something to help her friend. She looked around, and she saw a path between the rocks that led deeper into the ravine. She picked up her bag and she ran. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the fight continuing. She could hear the Krillians screaming. She could hear Teao making his fierce badger sounds. She could hear weapons firing, but the blasts seemed to be hitting the rocks and the ground, not hitting the badger. The Krillians could not shoot without hitting each other, because Teao kept moving so fast and so unpredictably that they could never get a clear shot. The ravine twisted and turned, and soon Jiwan could no longer see the fight. But she could still hear it. She ran deeper and deeper into the ravine, her feet slipping on the red stones, her breath coming in hard gasps. She did not know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away. She had to find somewhere safe. She had to find a place where she could help Teao. Behind her, the sounds of the fight were getting quieter. This scared her even more than when they were loud. What if Teao was losing? What if the Krillians were winning? What if she was running away and leaving her friend to die? She stopped running. She turned around and looked back at the way she had come. She was hidden around a corner of the ravine, out of sight of the Krillians. But she could still hear them, and they were getting closer again. The fighting was moving toward her. Jiwan made a decision. She took off her colony suit jacket and she waved it in the air above the rock she was standing on, making it visible above the edge of the ravine. She made small sounds, not loud, but loud enough that the creatures would hear her. She was showing them where she was. She was drawing their attention to her. She did not do this because she wanted them to catch her. She did this because she wanted them to stop fighting with Teao. She wanted to divide their attention. She wanted to give her brave friend a chance to escape. Two of the Krillians came around the corner of the ravine. They saw her. They made clicking sounds that probably meant they had found their prey again. They began to move toward her with their weapons raised, their movements slower now and more careful. They were hurt and tired from fighting with Teao. One of them had blood coming from its armor. The other had a deep cut on one of its arms. Jiwan ran again. She ran deeper into the ravine, trying to move fast but also trying to stay where they could see her. She needed them to keep chasing her. She needed them to keep their attention on her and not on Teao. But as she ran, she realized something. She had run so far from the colony that she did not know how to find her way back. The ravine twisted and turned in ways that all looked the same. The red rocks and orange sky all looked the same. She was lost. The sounds of the Krillians getting closer made this very clear to her. They were moving faster now. They were no longer tired. They were excited. They thought they had caught their prey. They thought the hunt was finally over. Jiwan looked around desperately. She saw a small cave opening in the side of the ravine, just a dark hole between two rocks. It was very small, smaller than the hiding place under the boulder where she had started. But it was there, and it was the only choice she had. She ran toward the cave and squeezed herself through the opening. It was tight. The rocks scraped her arms and her legs, but she pushed herself through and fell inside the cave. It was very dark. It was very small. She could barely move inside it. But as she lay there, trying not to breathe too loudly, she heard something. She heard Teao. The badger was making sounds, calling to her, trying to find her. He had broken free from the Krillians. He had escaped from the fight, and he was looking for her. The sounds of the Krillians were still close, but they seemed confused now. They were making clicking sounds that sounded like questions. Where had the girl gone? Where had the small creature gone? How could two such simple animals have survived against them? Jiwan waited in the darkness of the cave. She waited and listened. And then, after a long time that felt like forever, she heard the sound of engines again. The sounds of the Krillian ship. It was moving. It was leaving. The ship's engines grew louder and louder. The sound shook the rocks of the ravine and sent small stones falling from the cliffs above. Jiwan covered her ears and pressed herself back into the small cave, afraid that the vibrations would bring the whole mountain down on top of her. But the noise continued to grow, reached a peak, and then slowly began to fade away. The ship was leaving. The Krillians were giving up. Jiwan stayed in the cave for a very long time after the sound disappeared completely. She was afraid that this was a trick. She was afraid that they had only gone up into the air and would come back down again. She was afraid that leaving the cave would be a mistake that would cost her everything. But then she heard something that made her heart stop and then start again, very fast. She heard a small, familiar sound. It was Teao. He was making a soft, chirping call. He was calling to her. He was looking for her. "Teao!" Jiwan called out. Her voice sounded strange in the small cave, echoing off the rocks. "Teao, I am here!" The badger made another sound, louder this time. He had heard her. He knew where she was. Jiwan pulled herself out of the cave, pushing through the tight opening again. Her arms and legs hurt. There were small cuts on her skin where the rocks had scraped her, but she did not care about any of that. When she came out of the cave, she saw Teao waiting for her. The badger was standing on a rock about 5 meters away. He was hurt. His fur was matted with blood. There were cuts on his body and his legs. But when he saw Jiwan, he made a sound that was not a sound of pain. It was a sound of happiness. It was a sound of reunion. Jiwan ran to him and dropped to her knees and picked him up carefully, trying not to hurt his wounds. She held him against her chest and she cried. She cried because she was alive. She cried because Teao was alive. She cried because she had been so afraid, and that fear was now pouring out of her. "You were so brave," she whispered into his fur. "You were so brave. I have never seen anything so brave." Teao made a small chirping sound. He was tired. He was hurt. But he was also happy. He was with his girl. That was all that mattered. It took Jiwon a long time to make her way back toward the colony. She did not know exactly where she was, and she had to follow the sun to find her direction. She walked slowly because Teao was too hurt to move fast, and she did not want to hurt him more. She held him against her body like he was made of the most precious thing in the universe. As she walked, her mind began to work again. She thought about what had happened. She thought about how her mother would react when she came back. She thought about how the colony would react when they learned about the Krillians. She thought about what this all meant. Then she saw something that made her stop walking. Ahead of her, rising above the red rocks, she could see the white dome of the colony. She had found her way back. She was going to make it. But before she could take another step, the ground in front of her began to glow. Red beams of light shot down from the sky and hit the earth. It was not the Krillian ship. It was something else. It was something coming from inside the colony. The electromagnetic pulse emitter. Her mother had activated it. Minseo, Jiwon's mother, was monitoring the emergency frequencies from her position in the communication center. When her daughter's location tracker had started sending signals, when weapons had been fired in the ravine, when something terrible was clearly happening to her child, she had made a choice that went against every rule of the colony. She had activated the emergency defense system. The electromagnetic pulse swept across the surface of Kepler 442b, and it did something that the scientists had not expected. It did not just protect against solar radiation. It disrupted the Krillian technology. The ship in the sky lost power for a moment. Its weapons systems went dark. Its navigation systems shut down. For the creatures on the ground, the effect was even worse. The two Krillians that were chasing Jiwon, the ones that had been searching for her in the ravine, had technology that relied completely on their communication devices and their targeting systems. When the pulse hit them, they were left alone and blind. They could not see. They could not hear each other. They could not know where to go or what to do. One of them started firing weapons randomly, hoping to hit something. The other started running, trying to get back to the ship. They had lost the hunt. They had lost the power that they relied on so completely. And they had lost their will to continue. Jiwon saw the Krillian ship rise into the air. It moved slowly at first, then faster and faster, until it shot up through the clouds and disappeared into space. The two Krillians were not on it anymore. They were still on the ground, still running, still trying to find their way. But Jiwon did not care about that anymore. She only cared about getting to the colony. She only cared about seeing her mother. She only cared about Teao. She began to run toward the dome, her legs pumping as fast as they could, tears streaming down her face. Teao held onto her coat, his small claws gripping the fabric, his head resting against her shoulder. They ran together toward home. The doors of the colony opened before Jiwon could even press the button. Her mother had been watching on the cameras. Minseo stood in the opening, waiting, and when she saw her daughter running toward her, she made a sound that was between a laugh and a scream of relief. Jiwon fell into her mother's arms, and Minseo held both her and Teao, holding them like she would never let them go. Around them, other colony members were appearing, looking at the strange scene, beginning to understand what had happened. A child and a honey badger had gone out to explore the surface. A Krillian ship had come, and somehow, impossibly, they had survived. Somehow, impossibly, they had won. In the days and weeks that followed the attack, the colony changed. The story of what had happened spread through the human settlement like fire spreading through dry grass. A child and her honey badger had fought against aliens and lived. A small animal had shown courage that no one had expected. The Krillians, creatures that humans had feared for so long, had run away. The colony's medical team worked very hard to help Teao recover from his wounds. The badger had injuries that were serious and painful. Deep cuts covered his small body. His fur, which had been so thick and strong, was matted with blood. But the honey badger was not a creature that gave up. He was not a creature that could be kept quiet while he healed. He wanted to move and explore and play even when he was still very hurt. Jiwan stayed by his side every moment she could. When she was not sleeping or eating, she was in the medical room sitting with Teao, telling him stories about the things they would do together when he was well again. The badger seemed to understand her voice. And when she was there, he seemed to hurt less. Minseo, Jiwan's mother, also spent much time in the medical room. She watched her daughter with Teao, and she began to understand something that Jiwan had known all along. The bond between a human and an animal was not a simple thing. It was not just about owning a pet or having a companion. It was something deeper. It was something that could make even a small, wounded creature find the strength to keep fighting. The colony's leaders called meetings to discuss what had happened. They wanted to understand how the attack had occurred. They wanted to know why the Krillians had come and why they had left. Scientists examined the weapons that the Krillians had left behind. They took samples of the blood that had been spilled in the ravine. They tried to understand the aliens better. But what surprised everyone most was something that no one expected. The remains of the two Krillians that had been left behind told a story of injuries that should not have been possible. The scientists found evidence that the small creature, the honey badger, had actually wounded these creatures seriously enough that they could not continue fighting. They found claw marks that matched Teo's claws. They found tissue damage that showed the Krillians had been fighting a creature that refused to stop and refused to surrender. The Krillian commander, a creature named Vexithar, received reports of the attack back on his ship. He listened to the survivors explain how they had been defeated. They told him about the small animal. They told him about the girl. They told him about the weapons systems that had failed. And they told him about how they had been forced to run. Vexithar had hunted for more than 100 years. He had fought creatures from dozens of species. He had never been defeated by anything. But the report from this planet, from this small human colony, told him something that made him change his mind about humans forever. It told him that humans were not the weak and simple creatures he had believed them to be. It told him that humans would fight for each other, even for an animal. It told him that humans bonded with other creatures in ways that created strength that could not be measured with weapons or technology. Vexthar ordered his ship to leave the planet. He ordered his surviving soldiers to be brought aboard. He ordered the colony to be marked as a territory that was too dangerous to invade. In the official records of the Krillian Empire, Kepler 442b became known as a world where hunting humans was not worth the risk. Back in the colony, life began to return to something like normal. But normal had changed. Jiwan became famous. Children wanted to be like her. Adults wanted to talk to her and hear the story directly from her mouth. Some people wanted to thank her for showing them that courage was possible. Others wanted to understand how she had survived. But Jiwan did not feel like a hero. She felt like a girl who had just done what was right. When people called her brave, she would always say the same thing. Teao was brave. I just loved him. 6 weeks after the attack, Teao was strong enough to leave the medical room. His wounds had healed, leaving scars on his fur and his skin. But these scars were like medals. They showed the world that this small creature had lived through something terrible and had survived. They showed that courage was real and that it mattered. On the day that Teao was released from the medical room, the entire colony came to see him. Jiwan carried him out on her arms, and when people saw him, they began to cheer. They clapped their hands. They made sounds of joy and celebration. But Teao did not care about the celebration. All he cared about was being with his girl. When Ji-won set him down on the ground, he immediately began to explore the colony again, moving through the corridors with his small legs pumping, his nose up in the air, smelling everything as if he had never seen the place before. That night, Min Seo prepared a special meal. She cooked meat and vegetables in ways that Teao loved. She made sweet things for Ji-won. They sat together as a family, the three of them, and ate in silence that felt full of meaning. "Your father would have been proud," Min Seo said to her daughter as they finished eating. "He always said that Teao was special. He always said that the badger was the most important thing we brought to this world. I did not understand what he meant at the time, but now I do." Ji-won looked at her mother, and then at Teao, who was cleaning his paws with his tongue, looking completely satisfied with his meal. She understood, too. She understood that her father had seen something in the badger that went beyond size or strength or weapons. He had seen a spirit. He had seen courage. He had seen something that could never be broken. The story spread beyond the colony. Messages went out to other human settlements, to other colonies, to human ships traveling through space. The story of the girl and the honey badger reached places that the Krillians had never been, and it gave hope to humans who had lived in fear of the great hunters. They all learned the same lesson. Sometimes the strongest things in the universe were the smallest things. Sometimes a creature the size of a child's toy could show an entire species what courage really meant. Sometimes love and loyalty were more powerful than weapons and armor.